Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Science. We are going to do lesson 3.2 today, Investigating Wavelength by Exploring Pitch. So we have figured out how amplitude might affect how a dolphin's calf hears his mother's call and recognizes it. We're going to keep exploring how sounds can be different so we can figure out what else might help the calf to recognize his mother's call. If you haven't watched the video on pitch that I posted in Google Classroom, please stop this video and do it now. And then continue this video when you're finished. If you have watched the video, just continue this video now. So, why are some sounds different from other sounds? Well, not only can sounds be different volumes, loud or quiet, they can also be different pitches, high or low. We're going to talk about pitch today. Pitch is also, when we're talking about sound waves, the wavelength. So we're going to investigate that in the sim. You're going to use the orange one, and we're going to use the custom sound mode of the sim again. We're going to continue to investigate what causes sounds to be different from one another. So we already know what happens when we change the amplitude of a sound. We're going to leave the amplitude slider at medium, so don't touch that one today. We're going to try to make other changes. So what other changes can we make? Well, we can look at the wavelength. So you're going to go to page 51 in your Google Classroom notebook. You don't have this notebook at home. You're going to read the directions. You're going to observe what happens when you change the wavelength of your sound, and you're going to record your observations on this page. Notice they want you to make observations with your ears, so what you hear about the sound and how it changes, and you're going to make an observation with your eyes. So they want you to look at the shape of the wave. So I want you to pause this video and complete page 51 now. So let's talk about what you saw when you set the wavelength slider to long. So what did you see? What happened to the wavelength? Now let's talk about what you heard. How did the sound change when you moved the slider back and forth? So wavelength, when it was on short, what did you hear? When it was on medium, what did you hear? And on long, what did you hear? All right, so let's talk about what pitch means. Pitch means how low or high a sound is. Moving the wavelength slider changed the pitch of the sound. What connection do you see between wavelength we see and the pitch that we hear? What happens when you put the wavelength on short? What happens to the pitch? Does it get high or does it go low? That's your connection. How would you describe the wavelength of a sound for a high-pitched sound? Is the wavelength short or long? That's the words that we're going to describe for wavelengths. And what about a low-pitched sound? Was the wavelength short, medium, or long? All right, so here's how we can define wavelength. The wavelength is the distance from one peak of a wave to the next. If you look at my diagram up at the top of the screen, I've got a red line that goes from the top of one wave to the very top of another wave. The peak of the wave is where the wave gets to its highest point. Okay, so you see the long red line that goes from the top of one wave to the top of the next wave. That is the length of a wave. So here's our takeaway. When sound waves have different wavelengths, we hear sounds with different pitches. I've got this neat anchor chart that was put together for you to help with the waveform between volume and pitch. So when we're describing sound with what we observe with our ears, what we hear, we're going to use the word volume and pitch. So volume, when we refer to volume, we're talking about loud or quiet. When we look at pitch, we're going to describe that as high or low, is what you hear. When you're describing the actual sound wave, This is what you cannot see. This is what you have to do when you're describing different sounds to someone, like the park director for the park superintendent for Blue Bay. When she wants to know how the mother dolphin makes a call, or how the dolphin calf knows that it's his mother's call, you have to tell her what's happening to the sound wave as well. Remember, in science, we have to describe things that we cannot see. All right, so when we describe the waveform for volume, we're going to use the word amplitude. The amplitude is the height of the wave. So is the wave large or small? When the wave is large, what is the volume? Good, it's loud. When the height of the wave or the amplitude of the wave is small, the volume is quiet. So maybe you can remember that L and L go together, loud and large. Okay? Now let's look at wavelength. When we're describing the waveform for pitch, we're going to use the word wavelength. The wavelength is the distance between peaks, long or short. So if the pitch is high, the wavelength is going to be what? Short. Very good. And if the pitch is low, the wavelength is going to be long. Okay? We're going to keep investigating this over the next couple of lessons. And right now, this is the end of this lesson. I want you to go to notebook page 52 and complete that one. That is the end of your lesson for today after you complete page 52.